Okay, so I'm just going to poke those wires in for now. Okay, so next we'll have a look at connecting these wires up to our input jack and installing the input jack. Okay, so next we want to wire up our 2 wires to our input jack, and that'll pretty much complete the electronics. An S-style or T-style guitar kit are pretty much 2 of the simplest guitars in terms of wiring. So if you're not experienced with soldering, it's a good choice. Now, as I said, we've only got the 2 wires to connect up here. As we know before, the black was our ground and the red was our hot wire. Now on the actual input jack, you'll see we've got 2 lugs. The lug that's connected to the inner sleeve is our ground, and the lug connected to the outer ring, which is incidentally connected to this arm which locks the cable in place, is our hot wire. If you take a guitar jack or a guitar cable, pop it through, you'll see that the cable's separated by that rubber ring, and the tip is then in touch with the hot, while the shaft of the cable is in touch with the ground, and that's pretty much how that signal's transferred. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is some soldering. So if you haven't done any soldering before, pretty much any cheap soldering iron will do the job if you're only making a couple of quick connections like this. If you're going to work on a few more guitars, then you're probably going to be better off having something with a little bit more temperature control and a more solid base. Obviously you're going to need a few things. So first thing you need is, of course, a soldering iron. Next thing you need is some solder. Now your kit will come with more than enough solder to complete this relatively small job. I'd also keep a damp sponge nearby just to clean the tip of your soldering iron. And when it comes to soldering, the other thing I'd recommend is to keep the tip of your soldering iron tinned. And what that means is you're just having a small coating of solder on the tip of your soldering iron, and that prevents the tip from oxidizing. So generally when the tips start going or they start oxidizing, the solder balls up and doesn't really stick properly. So you can see I've just got a thin coating of solder there. Now I'd also tin those wires as well. But first I'm just going to put some protection in place for the finish. As I said, the black's our ground, so it gets connected to the lug that's connected to the inner sleeve. That's the word on soldering as well. When you are soldering connections, I should just tin those 2 components as well. When you are soldering, just keep in mind soldering is not really like gluing something together. It's more a transfer of heat. So you'll have solder on your iron, and the soldering iron will be hot, and the solder will be drawn to that heat. You do need to heat up your elements a little first before you can expect the solder to stick. So in the case of this connection here, I'll heat up the actual lug for a couple of seconds before I bring the solder in and complete the connection. Having a little trouble seeing that. So just bending that back a little bit to hold it in place. Just making sure I can get to it there. You do definitely want to have some protection for your finish as well. As I said, just apply some heat, just a couple of seconds, just till it's hot enough. Just drop a small amount of solder on. Don't need to use much. And just test the connection. So just give the wires a small pull, and that one's fine. So I'm just going to tin that as well. So I'll just push that through the eyelet of the hot lug. So obviously make sure when you put this in place that the jack's facing downwards. Okay, so our next job is to install the rest of this floating tremolo system. So I've got a spring claw here, and the spring claw sits, well, it doesn't sit hard against the body. It depends how tight the screws are, the 2 screws that are holding that in place. And then a spring is installed like so, and that sits into the tremolo block like so. And depending on the interplay between the springs and the tension of the strings depends on how much of a tremolo action you get. The other thing we need to do also is solder this ground wire to the trem claw just in the center, but we'll do that next. We'll get this installed first. So easiest way to do this is measure halfway across the cavity. You see I've just got a small dot there, and line that up with the center of the tremolo claw, and then just mark those holes. Those holes are a little bigger, so I'm just going to mark those with a pen. I like to have them coming into the middle 3 like so, but really that's up to you. And for now, just tighten that up again. We'll fine tune this when we get around to doing the actual setup. Okay, so next we need to connect this ground wire to the spring claw, and that'll ground out our circuit. With your tremolo cover, just the same thing again. I've just aligned center from the center of the neck plate and the strap button. Tape that in place. I'm just going around and marking the location of my pilot holes. Okay, so now we've got our electronics connected. We'll quickly test our pickups. Okay, so I'm just going to test the neck pickup first. Okay, you can hear that's coming through. Try second position, which should be middle and neck. Third, which should just be middle. Fourth, which should be middle and bridge. And fifth, which should just be bridge. And we can hear that volume is working as well. Okay, so the very last hardware component we need to install are our string trees. Now, string trees, if you're not familiar, they look like this and have a small barrel that sits underneath just to give them enough height to clear the strings. And they sit on your 4 highest pitch strings, so like so, between the D and G and B and E, and obviously the higher barrel is for the G and D strings. Now they just sit in the middle like that, and what that will do will increase the break angle of those strings over the nut, and that'll just stop the strings rattling about in the nut. And also increase, because we're increasing pressure on the nut, we're also increasing sustain. Just line these up by eye. Just make sure you're going in very straight, and then mark your indentation like so.